When we reached the open space about the stream, Tamakawawa was still sitting there on the bank with his head bowed. Dreamer Gray, on catching sight of us, threw away his unlighted cigar and came to meet us. "I am the most patient of men," he said, "but I suppose the old chief there knows what he's about." "We can do nothing but wait," I said, and we all sat down on the mossy sward to do so. But we had not to wait long, for presently the chief started to his feet and began striding rapidly up and down the bank. His head was erect, his step was firm, and but for his gray hair and aged face one would have said he had not grown old. His pace quickened to a run. He stopped and performed an imaginary fight with the empty air, thrusting with his spear and shouting battle cries as he had done in his early years. Then he dashed down his spear with the air of a man whose mind is made up, threw off his outer robe, and, with a short run, plunged from the bank. We rose from the ground and ran forward to see if the Ancient One was really equal to this daring feat. 2, 3, for minutes we stood looking at the dark pool, and then Gray said, "If he hasn't got through, he certainly won't come up alive now." "He must be through," I said, "he must be through." But I was getting anxious. "Look! Look!" cried Crystal, "the water's growing less, see. It's sinking, it's drying up." I gave a sigh of relief, for I saw the water was rapidly diminishing, and knew that the old chief had gained the ledge inside, passed round the lake, and pushed the great lever up to stop the flow of the water. Gradually the surface of the pool sank below the aperture in the mountain wall and, finally, left the way perfectly clear. Gray made a movement as if to climb down and go in through the black opening, but I restrained him. "We must wait till he returns," I said. "We can do nothing without him." Accordingly we waited with our eyes fixed upon the dark round opening, level with the bed of the channel as to its lower margin, while its upper part was considerably higher than a man's head. Presently there was a glimmer of light approaching through the darkness of the interior, and then a figure appeared in the aperture, standing erect with a blazing torch in his hand. The sight startled me, for the figure was enveloped in a large war cloak made of dog's fur, and the whole solemn bearing of the wearer, as he held his torch aloft and stood looking at us, was that of the guardian priest of the ancient temple. In another moment, however, I recognized Tamakawawa as he might have been 18 years before, when he first brought Gray and his wife to this strange place. He beckoned to us, and we climbed down the bank as quickly as possible, and hurried along the shingly bed of the channel towards him. "Speak few words, O Pakeha people," he said solemnly, "but follow in my footsteps." He turned and led the way. Gray went first in his wake, Crystal followed, and I came last. When we had gained the level rock above, by means of the rough, but not difficult, niches in the wall, the torchlight shed a fitful glare upon the nearer rim of the great basin, and upon part of the lake. The water, flung up tumultuously in the center, boiled and effervesced and lapped against the rocky rim on which we stood. Far away at the end of the narrowing gulf could be seen the giant's window, through which the sunlight streamed like silver, but grew golden as it fell obliquely into the denser darkness of the abyss. The wall of the cavern beyond the lake was lost in gloom, into which I knew the great spar was tapering off to its wooden sprit near the overhanging crags of the vaulted roof. But we saw these things in a glance, for Tamakawawa passed on along the margin of the lake, bearing his torch, and we followed. He halted at the part of the cavern wall by the lakeside, where I had seen Garaki's kid of Kamaras ascend by a cord. "O friend of the forest tree," he said, drawing me a little aside, "the mysteries of this ancient temple are great and wonderful. I am going by the way of the fish, which no man can find without a guide, nor, if he found it, could he pass that way without being taught. Now stand there close to the wall, and hold the mountain lily by the hand, lest she fall in the darkness. I go. And, when you hear the roaring of the sea overhead, and the great god Tangaroa lets loose the flood, then you will know that Tamakawawa has passed in safety, that his end is not yet." "And what then, O chief? Do we follow, or will you return? I will let a rope down from above by the wall where you stand. Climb up the rope, O friend. Then the man who has forgotten will tie the mountain lily to it, and together we shall draw her up, and let the rope down again for the man who has forgotten to ascend. Is my word clear? Yes, O chief, I replied, but if you fail, what then? Then my end will have come, he said, and the ancient spell I cast over the man who has forgotten will return to me, his memory of all these years will be blotted out, and his new thought will link onto the old as if it were but yesterday. He will remember all, even the secret of the way of the winged fish, for he has passed through it from above. Most clearly he will remember the way of the lizard beyond the giant's window, for by that path did he leave before forgetting the things he knew. Thus, if I perish, you shall escape through him. It is good, O Tohunga, I said, wondering at his strange words. He turned and, torch in hand, passed round the lake to the rock behind which, on a former occasion, I had hidden while Ngaraki had plunged from it into the depths. I went back to the spot where Crystal and Gray were standing, close to the wall. Let me hold your hand, I said to Crystal, and explained briefly to them both what strange thing would happen. I found her hand in the darkness, and as I held it in mine even the thought of Kahikatea did not intrude. Thus in silence we watched the movements of the Tohunga across the lake. He removed his war cloak and hung it somewhere in the shadows of the wall. Then he approached the edge of the lake and dipped the end of the torch in the water. The faint hiss reached us over the seething tide, and then there was darkness, in which, as I held Crystal's warm hand, it seemed to me that we two were alone in space. A sudden plunge in the lake aroused me, then all was still, except for the ghostly movements of the welling flood. Half a minute went by, in which my thoughts were with the chief who had undertaken I knew not what dangerous task in the depths. Would he fail? As I asked myself the question, my ears detected a change in the sound of the water. The boiling, seething motion ceased gradually, and there was a commotion in the depths of the lake, a commotion conveyed suggestively by a wave rolling round the margin, flapping over as it went, and again by the peculiar sucking sounds of whirling eddies which seemed to close together with little claps of the water here and there. Ah! There was a sound I could interpret in the darkness. It was made by the water rolling off the sides of some object which had risen above the surface not 4 yards from us. It was, I knew, the head of the great stone lever in the depths. Then the profound silence which followed was broken by a hollow roar like that of some wild beast pent in a cave within the roof. Louder and louder it grew until, with a booming sound like thunder, the waters gushed from an opening above, and, their forefoam showing vaguely in the darkness, fell with a deafening tumult into the lake. The spray dashed up in our faces and I drew a long breath, for I knew that Tamakawawa had passed by the way of the winged fish. Against the din of the cascade I heard Crystal trying to make herself heard. I raised the hand I was clasping, and, placing her finger and thumb on the lobe of my ear, bent my head towards her. "He is safe," she cried, and I felt her warm breath on my cheek. Then she guided my hand to her own ear, and I cried back, "Yes, he will soon let down the rope." My hand still retained hers, and as I spoke in her ear a wisp of her hair strayed across my lips. I forgot everything. The roar of the cataract seemed to drown all except my passion, and that overwhelmed me. Suddenly I enclosed her in my arms and, drawing her to me, kissed her wildly on the brow and cheek and lips. For a moment she lay still in my arms, then she pushed herself gently away from me as if she were saying, "I do not know what a woman will do. I owe you everything, but not this, at least not yet." At length, after waiting several minutes, I felt something swing against my shoulder. I stretched out my hand and caught it. It was the rope. When I had shouted the old chief's directions again in the ears of my companions, that Crystal was to come second and Gray last, I tried my weight on the rope, and, finding it firm, climbed up. It seemed a long way in the darkness, and I was nearly exhausted when at length a hand slid down over the rope and touched me. Another hand found my other wrist and, as I climbed a little further, both gripped me beneath the armpits, raised me over a barrier of rock, and set me on my feet on a level foothold. "Hipakiha," said the deep voice of the chief, "is the mountain lily safe?" "Quite safe," I replied. My first thought was to strike a match to see what space there was to move about in. I did so, and found that the old chief and myself were standing on a level platform let into the wall of the cavern. He went into the shadows and returned with a torch, which I lighted from the match, and set in an upright position in a crevice. He then unwound the rope from a rounded knob of rock on the inside of the barrier, and let down a few more yards for Gray to make a kind of swing for Crystal. A rough flax mat protected the rope from the irregularities of the rock, and the barrier itself projected far enough from the wall to enable her to keep clear of it in the ascent. It was not until, by our united efforts, she was drawn up and stood safely beside us, that I breathed freely. The rope was let down, and Gray came up soon afterwards like an acrobat. Tamakawawa then made a sign to me to draw the rope up again, and, as I was doing so, it resisted my efforts for a moment, as if someone was holding it. However, it came loose, and I thought that perhaps a knot on the end must have caught on some projecting piece of rock. Yet the matter puzzled me a little, especially when I felt the end of the rope soon afterwards and found there was no knot there. But it was no time for fancies. Tamakawawa took the torch from Crystal, and showed the way into a high tunnel which, as we followed him, led us right into the backbone of the rock, and gradually took the form of a spiral ascent, though I could only guess at this from the somewhat steep grade, and the continual curve to the left. We soon lost the roar of the cataract as we circled up higher and higher into the silent heart of the mountain. After toiling up in this way for some time, we came to a hollow place of many chambers. Here also was a lever-like structure similar to the great spar in the lower part of the cavern, though very much smaller and more delicately fashioned. Upon the arm of the lever I saw, by the light of the torch, some peculiar figures. I drew Tamakawawa's attention to them and asked him what they signified. "There is an ancient tradition," he said doubtfully, "that this stone will be raised when Hinori returns, and that when it is done all the ways of the temple will be closed, but its secret has been lost. See? The end hangs over an abyss, the secret is hidden in the depths." It was balanced on a breast-high ridge of rock, and beyond was a gulf which the light of the torch could not span. "Remain here, O white people," said the chief, after we had wondered at this strange contrivance. "Wait here in the place of many chambers, and I will go and speak with Miriami, and bring her to you. But," he added, drawing me aside, "I will say nothing of the little maiden. I cannot face the stars in her eyes." Leaving us the torch, he vanished through another tunnel, and left us in this place of many chambers to await his return with the lost Miriam Gray. Crystal stood with her hand on the tapering end of the stone lever, which stretched its arm horizontally into the center of the chamber in which we stood. "It would be easy to raise this," she said. "I wonder that no one of the long line of priests, which you say has guarded the secrets of this place for ages, has had enough curiosity to try it." "According to Tamakawawa," I said, "it seems to be a means of hiding the temple and its secrets forever when the ancient queen returns, the reason being perhaps that there is immense wealth hidden somewhere here. Let us see what the other end of the lever is like." I held the torch over the barrier, and we peered into the gloom. Resting in the hollow of the head of the lever, some little distance out, we discerned a large round stone of many tons in weight, its outline dimly defined against the blackness beyond. Below this yawned a pit, in which the rays of the torch were lost. "It seems to me like a system of rolling stones," I said. "If this lever were raised and that stone launched into the gulf below, there is no telling in what way it might carry out some design originated by the founders of this strange place. No doubt there are levers below, balanced in such a way that this stone would move them and liberate other rolling stones, which would run in grooves prepared for them to execute some errand connected with the various openings into the mountain. Why not? Could anything be more gigantic and wonderful in design than the great levers in the cavern below? There were giants in those days, said Gray, joining us and glancing round as he spoke. This must all have been hewn out with design. There are 6 little caves, I have counted them by matchlight, all opening into this larger one, and some of them contain the openings of other tunnels leading goodness knows where. Little by little Crystal and her father gravitated towards the opening through which the old chief had disappeared, and by which he was soon to return with the one for whom we had undertaken our journey. Hand in hand they stood together with their eyes fixed on that opening. I placed the torch so that its fitful glare fell upon their now pale faces, and retired into the shadows, where I stood leaning upon the arm of the lever to watch this reunion between husband and wife, between mother and daughter. The two stood silent and motionless. I saw, by the uncertain light which revealed their faces, that their feelings were too deep for speech. I saw by the nervous clasp of their hands that their suspense was great. But it came to an end. Gray made a sudden movement and bent his head forward. I knew his ear had caught the sound of approaching footsteps. In another moment Te-Makawawa issued from the darkness, and, standing aside, folded his arms and remained with his chin on his breast. By the brief glance I caught of his features I saw that his expression was even more troubled and perplexed than before. Presently in the opening of the tunnel appeared one whom at first glance I took to be a Maori woman of high rank. She was clothed in a rich silky kaitaka, her feet were sandaled, her bare left arm and breast glistened through the masses of dark hair which fell loose about her. As she stood there a moment between the dim light and the darkness, like a tall Maori chieftainess, a leaping flame of the torch showed her face more clearly. It was like the pale face of a Madonna, sweet, tender, and good. The high brow, the magnetic-looking eyes, with delicately penciled eyebrows, gave a look of tremendous artistic and concentrative power to the face, and this power seemed only equaled by the pervading tenderness of her expression. I saw at a glance that this woman with the stars in her eyes must without doubt be the remarkable creator of that remarkable work in the marble cave above. But Dreamer Gray had taken a step towards her and stood gazing at the woman who, it was slowly dawning on him, must be his wife. She drew near to him, at first hesitatingly, then, without passion, but with a ring of great tenderness in her voice, she cried, "My husband," and, placing her arms about his neck, laid her cheek upon his. Held in each other's arms, they remained silent for a moment, while, in the shadow nearby, Crystal stood watching them with I know not what emotions in her heart, what dawn of joy upon her face. At last a little cry escaped her, "Mother!" It came like a note of pathetic music, like the last beat of a long-sustained chord before it is resolved, and all is plain to the listener. Te-Makawawa raised his head. A tremor shook some depth of my matter-of-fact being, which had never been touched before. Husband and wife who had found each other lifted their faces at the word, and their eyes met. Gray disengaged one arm, and, stretching it out towards Crystal, said in a voice unsteady with emotion, "It is our daughter." Slowly, and as if she did not understand, the mother turned her face towards the white figure standing nearby. In the half-light she scanned Crystal's features. Then she started, giving a quick interjection in the Maori tongue. The hand which had rested on Gray's neck slid down and clutched his arm. "My daughter?" "Hush! Our daughter is dead, dear." "Te-Makawawa," she gasped hoarsely, speaking again in his own tongue, "the light! The light! Quick!" Why was she so eager? She knew, or thought she knew, that her child was dead, and yet she was gazing at Crystal's face like one struck dumb with astonishment. The chief drew near with the torch and held it up so that its light clearly showed the faces of all. Crystal was holding her arms out to her mother with a yearning look upon her face.